She sat in the divorce hearing as silent as a statue. While her husband Julian smirked and divided their assets, Ilara Vance said nothing. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She didn't argue for a single dollar more. He thought she was broken. A beautiful empty shell he was finally discarding. He left the courtroom with his young mistress laughing. 6 months later, that same laugh died in his throat when he saw the paparazzi photos Ilara, stepping onto the world's most exclusive mega yacht in Monaco, greeted at the top, not by a new lover, but by the one man who could destroy him completely. The 48th floor conference room at Jacobson Low & Stone was a tomb of imported marble, stifling gray upholstery and the smell of old money. The air, recycled and chilled to a precise 68 degrees, felt too thin to breathe. It was a room built for the quiet, bloodless execution of lives, marriages, and fortunes. Across a vast, reflective mahogany table, Julian Thorne watched his wife. His soon-to-be ex-wife, Ilara Vance. He had to give her that an aesthetic triumph. She wore a simple, sleeveless, sheathed dress in a shade of cream that probably had a name like eggshell or oyster. It was designed to signal quiet expense, a taste he had cultivated in her. Her dark, almost black hair was pulled back into a chignon so severe it looked painful, drawing her high cheekbones into sharp relief. But it was her eyes that unnerved him. They were a clear, crystalline blue, and they were fixed on the $5,000 floral arrangement in the center of the table, as if it held the secrets of the universe. They were, he realized, completely blank. There was no rage, no sorrow, no anything. As you can see, Ilara, his lawyer, Robert Jacobson, a man whose tailored pinstripes and reptilian smile cost $2,000 an hour, purred, "Mr. Thorne has been exceptionally, one might even say profoundly generous." Julian allowed a small, indulgent smile to touch his lips. He was being generous. He was giving her the downtown condo, a property he'd bought for her as a hobby studio a decade ago, and had literally forgotten he owned. He was giving her a lump sum, a severance package, really. 7 figures, Robert had called it, as if it were a grand gesture. To Julian, whose net worth was a number so large it was abstract, it was a rounding error. It was what he'd spent on Chloe's birthday weekend. He had been braced for war. When he'd first told her 6 months ago, it had been a calculated ambush. He'd come home from a business trip to St. Bart's with Chloe and simply informed Ilara that he was in love and the marriage was over. He had expected the full operatic display, the screaming, the accusations, the tears, the "how could you after all I've given up for you" speech. He had his responses ready. He had his checkbook open. Instead, Ilara had looked up from the book she was reading. She had processed his words, and after a silence that stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds, she had simply said, "I see." She had then closed her book, placed it on the side table, and walked upstairs. By the next morning, she and a few suitcases were gone. No mess, no drama, just a vacuum. Her silence had been anticlimactic. It had cheated him of his victory of the moment where he got to be the magnanimous, regretful conqueror. Now in this sterile conference room, her silence was just irritating. "Ilara," Robert prompted, the silk in his voice fraying into impatience. "These terms are, as I've stated, non-negotiable, but we do require your signature to move forward." Ilara's gaze finally slowly lifted from the flowers. It drifted past Robert, past her own lawyer, a mousy middle-aged woman named Sarah, who looked thoroughly out of her depth, and landed on Julian. His breath caught. He was prepared for hatred. He was prepared for tears. He was not prepared for the polite, impersonal emptiness he saw. It was the look you'd give to a stranger on a crowded subway, a fraction of a second of acknowledgement before looking away. She wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at an obstacle. "I accept the terms," she said. Her voice, clear and low, did not tremor. It was the first time he'd heard it in months, and it was the voice of a stranger. Julian almost flinched. He'd wanted her to fight. He'd wanted to win that fight. He wanted to tell her, "Ilara, be reasonable. This is what's best. I need to be happy." Her quiet, immediate capitulation felt like a trick. It was unnatural. It only confirmed his long-held private diagnosis she was weak, fragile. She had built her entire existence on the scaffolding of his life, and now that he was kicking it out from under her, she was simply collapsing. Her lawyer, Sarah, looked visibly relieved, as if she'd expected her client to be eviscerated. She fumbled with the thick stack of documents and slid them across the polished wood. "Mrs. Thorne?" "Ilara," Sarah began. "Are you sure you don't want to—" "I am sure," Ilara said, cutting her off. Not unkindly, but with a finality that made even Robert Jacobson sit up a little straighter. Ilara reached into her simple, unbranded leather handbag. She ignored the row of gleaming silver Mont Blanc pens laid out like surgical tools. She pulled out a cheap blue plastic Bic, the kind you buy in a pack of 10. She clicked it. The sound, a sharp snick, was obscenely loud in the quiet room. She didn't read the documents. She simply turned to the last page. She signed her name. Ilara Vance, not Ilara Thorne. She had already reclaimed her name. She capped the pen. She stood. She nodded once, a quick, dismissive gesture to her own lawyer. She didn't look at Julian. She didn't look at Robert. She picked up her bag and walked to the enormous oak doors. "Ilara, wait," Julian said, standing up. It was an involuntary impulse. She paused, her hand on the brass handle, but she did not turn around. "What for, Julian?" "You're free. Isn't that what you wanted?" She opened the door and was gone. The whoosh of the door closer was the only sound. Robert Jacobson let out a long, slow breath. "Well, that was the easiest high-profile divorce of my career. That lump sum, Julian? She'll be back in 6 months when it's gone. She doesn't know how to manage." "She'll be fine," Julian said, sinking back into his chair. He loosened his Hermes tie. "She's resilient." He was already pulling out his phone. He sent a text to Chloe, who was waiting at Per Se for a celebratory lunch. "It's done. Order the 82 Patras." He felt a profound, giddy sense of relief. He was free. He was on his way to Monaco next month to close the Apex deal, the one that would make him a legend. He was on his way to a new life with a 24-year-old who adored him. He was Julian Thorne, and he had just won. So why, as he rode the elevator down in a cocoon of mirrored steel, did the image of her blank eyes and that cheap plastic pen make him feel a sudden, unwelcome chill? He shook it off. It was just the echo of a life now finished. Ilara Vance did not take a cab to a friend's house. She did not go to a bar for a stiff drink. She did not go to the airport to find herself in Italy. She took the subway, an anonymous face in the afternoon crowd, and went to the downtown condo. The one Julian had so generously allowed her to keep, not knowing it had always been legally and emotionally her escape pod. The condo was the antithesis of the opulent, suffocating penthouse she had shared with Julian. The penthouse was all gold leaf, dark woods, and heavy silks, a museum Julian had built to himself. The condo was a clean white box. It was a space of hard surfaces, white walls, and floor-to-all-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering, impersonal grid of the city. The main living area was dominated not by a sofa, but by a custom-built workstation. 3 4K monitors, a server tower humming quietly in a ventilated cabinet, and a keyboard that clicked with the satisfying mechanical precision of a weapon. She walked to the console table by the door and placed her keys in a small white porcelain bowl. She took off her shoes. She went to the minimalist kitchen, pulled a bottle of sparkling water from the fridge, and drank it, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. She had not been silent for the last 6 months. She had been meticulous. Julian Thorne had made the most common mistake of powerful men. He had assumed a lack of ego meant a lack of intellect. He had met Ilara at a modern art gallery opening. He saw a stunning, quiet art history major. He saw a woman who was content to be a beautiful, placid accessory. He did not see the other Ilara. The Ilara who had graduated from MIT at 19 with a dual degree in mathematics and quantitative economics. The Ilara who, before she'd even turned 21, was the most sought-after analyst at a secretive hedge fund so exclusive it didn't have a name on its building. She had built the predictive algorithms that saw the 2008 crash coming 6 months before anyone else. She had walked away from it all for Julian. He had found her intelligence intimidating. "I don't want to come home and talk about derivatives, Alara," he'd laughed early in their relationship. "I want to come home and just be. I want a partner. A wife." So she had become one. She had packed her brilliant, restless mind away, hiding it behind a mask of placid elegance. She learned to plan his galas, manage his 3 households, and listen politely to his monologues about killer instincts. She'd believed for a brief, foolish time that it was a fair trade for love. The day she found a single blonde-rooted hair extension and a Cartier earring in his travel bag was the day the trade was canceled. But it wasn't the infidelity that had sealed Julian's fate. It was what she found 3 days later. She was in his home office, a room he called the sanctuary, looking for a tax document. Julian, for all his genius, was organizationally a slob. He threw everything into drawers. Tucked inside a vintage leather-bound copy of The Art of War, a book she knew he'd never read, was a small matte black encrypted hard drive. He had used the same password he used for everything, the stock ticker of his first big win. APX1. It took Alara less than 4 minutes to bypass the basic encryption. It took her the rest of the night to understand what she was looking at. Julian wasn't just a shark. He was a high-level criminal. He was running a sophisticated multi-year securities fraud. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was cheating everyone. He was using a web of shell corporations, Cygnus Ventures, Nautilus Group, to artificially inflate the value of his private equity holdings before dumping them on his own investors. It was a classic pump and dump, but on a scale that was breathtaking in its audacity. The apex deal, the one he was moving to Monaco for, was to be his masterpiece, a final massive score, before he exited, leaving his partners and investors holding a multi-billion-dollar bag of worthless stock. Alara sat on the floor of his office until the sun came up, the glow of the laptop illuminating her face. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel betrayal. She felt cold. It was the clean, pure, exhilarating cold of a complex equation finally beautifully balancing. The trophy wife died on that floor. The quant was reborn. She copied the drive. She spent the next 2 months, not in spas or at luncheons, but in this condo. She traced the money. She cross-referenced every transaction. She taught herself to code in 3 new languages to follow the data trails through untraceable servers in the Caymans and Eastern Europe. She built a case file, an ironclad, data-driven, mathematically certain case that would not just put Julian in prison. It would dismantle his entire empire. It was then she realized why she couldn't argue in the divorce. Arguing meant attachment. Fighting for his generous settlement meant accepting his blood money. She wanted nothing from him. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a quarantine. Now, standing in her kitchen, she finished her water. She walked into her bedroom. On her dresser, next to a single-framed photograph, was a satellite phone. The photo was of her 20 years old in a graduation cap and gown, standing next to a rugged, silver-haired man. She picked up the phone and dialed the single number in its memory. A voice answered on the first ring. It was a deep, cultured baritone with an accent that was a mix of British and something unplaceable, like a man who was from everywhere. "Vance?" "It's done, Marcus," Alara said. "The divorce is finalized. I'm legally clean. No conflicts of interest." There was a pause, then a low, appreciative chuckle. "Excellent. Julian's Apex deal is moving to its final stage. He's presenting to the board in Monaco next month." "I know," Alara said. "He's scheduled his own execution. He thinks he's a lion, Marcus. He's just a lamb, and he's walking himself into the slaughterhouse." "The jet is fueled at Teterboro, wheels up when you are," the man said. "The Olympus is already moored at Port Hercules, and Alara, yes. Welcome back. The world has been far too quiet without you." Alara looked at her reflection in the dark window. The pale blank woman from the lawyer's office was gone. In her place was a woman with eyes that glittered like cut steel. "I'm not the one you need to worry about being quiet," she said, and ended the call. Julian Thorne felt for the first time in his life invincible. Life post-Alara was a spectacular high-definition upgrade. Chloe was a supernova, an explosion of blonde hair, spray tans, and ecstatic vocal adoration. He was also discovering spectacularly expensive, a beautiful purring machine designed to convert money into noise and Instagram posts. But that was fine. The Apex deal was about to make him a legend. He was sitting in the sky lounge of his new penthouse he'd sold, the one he shared with Alara, too many stale memories, as Chloe directed a team of movers installing a giant chrome-plated horse lamp. "Isn't it divine, J-Bear?" she trilled. "It's minimalist. It says we have power, but we're playful." "It's something, sweetheart," Julian said, scrolling through his emails. "Now I need you to be quiet for a bit. Daddy's working." "You're always working," she pouted, draping herself over his shoulders. She smelled of champagne and baccarat rouge. "Is it that Apex thing? You're going to be brilliant. You are brilliant." "It's not the deal." Julian snapped, his good mood evaporating. "It's Rivington. Marcus Rivington." The name was a curse in Julian's circles. The man was a myth, old money that ran so deep it made Julian's fortune look like lottery winnings. Rivington ran his global empire, Rivington Group, from an undisclosed location rumored to be his 150-meter mega yacht, the Olympus. He was the one investor Julian needed for the Apex deal to not just succeed, but to be a home run. Rivington's buy-in was the stamp of legitimacy. It would bring in the last of the skeptical institutional money. And for 3 solid months, Rivington had been a ghost. "He's stalling," Julian said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "My presentation to the board in Monaco is in 2 weeks, and his people just keep delaying. Mr. Rivington is evaluating the data." "What data? It's the cleanest, most profitable deal of the decade." "Maybe he's just jealous," Chloe offered, kissing his temple. "He's old. You're the future." Julian smiled. She was simple, but he liked that. "You're right." A few days later, he was at a celebratory dinner with his partners. He was in an expansive mood. He'd just bought a new Ferrari to match Chloe's. He passed his phone around, showing them a small item in page 6. It was a grainy, long-lens photo of Alara, of all people. She was sitting at an outdoor cafe in Paris, wearing sunglasses and reading a book. "See?" Julian boomed, laughing. "That's my ex. Looks like she's handling it well. On her eat, pray, love journey. Good for her. No hard feelings." His partners laughed with him. Chloe, sitting on his lap, giggled. "She looks so boring. I bet the book is about feelings." Julian laughed. The splinter of unease he'd felt after the divorce was completely gone. He almost pitied Alara with her little condo and her sad solo trips. She was a footnote. The next day, as he was packing for Monaco, his world cracked open. He was at his desk signing off on the travel manifest for his private jet. Chloe was in the other room arguing with her stylist about what to wear for the Grand Prix. His private line rang. It was Robert Jacobson. "Julian, we have a problem." "It's not a good time, Rob. I'm on my way to the jet, Monaco." "You're not going to Monaco, Julian. Not for this meeting." Robert's voice was tight, thin. "The board just postponed, indefinitely." Julian stopped the pen hovering over the paper. "What they can't." "On whose authority? It's my deal." "Rivington's," Robert said. "He didn't just stall, Julian. He moved against you. He sent in an auditor. A new firm, one I've never even heard of." "So we're clean," Julian shouted. "The books are clean. Are we, Julian? Are we really?" Robert's voice was suddenly very cold. "Because this firm, Vance Analytics, they sent a file, a preliminary findings report. Julian, it's everything. The shell companies, Cygnus, Nautilus, The timelines, the Cayman accounts. It's data I never saw, data you assured me didn't exist. A cold sweat broke out on Julian's skin. The pen in his hand snapped. Vance. Analytics. He whispered the name, tasting like ash. That's the name on the letterhead. Robert said, his voice grim. And they're not just auditing. They've submitted a parallel bid, a hostile takeover of the entire Apex portfolio backed by Rivington's holding company. Vance? Julian's mind was racing. It was a coincidence, a common name. It had to be. Who runs it? Who is this Vance? There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line. That's the part you're not going to like, Julian, Robert said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The CEO, the principal analyst, the one who signed the report. It's Alara. Julian's phone slipped from his hand. It hit the marble floor and skittered Robert's voice a tiny, frantic buzz. Alara. Alara, the quiet wife, the art history major, the woman reading a book in Paris. He remembered her face in the conference room. The blankness, the utter lack of emotion, the cheap plastic pen. It hadn't been defeat. It hadn't been weakness. It had been contempt. The Parisian café Page 6 had spotted Alara at was in fact the heavily secured private terrace of a bank in Geneva. The book she was reading was the final draft of the 200-page due diligence report on Julian Thorne's entire fraudulent career. Vance Analytics was not a new firm. It was a resurrected one. It was the name of the consulting business Alara had dreamed up in her MIT dorm room, the one she'd planned to start before Julian had convinced her that his life was a better one. She had registered the name 2 days after finding the hard drive. The settlement money, the generous 7-figure lump sum Alara had walked from the lawyer's office to her condo, and in her first official act as a free woman, wired the entire amount to a charity fund for victims of financial crimes. It was a poetic cleansing act, a market correction. She didn't need Julian's blood money. She had her own. Before she'd met Julian, her former boss, the man who had poached her from MIT's doctoral program, had made her a partner. When she left, she didn't just walk away. She'd put her shares in a blind trust managed by a quiet firm in Zurich. For 8 years, as she'd been planning charity balls and picking out upholstery, her original stake in that fund had compounded. It had been invested in the very algorithms she herself had built. When she'd reactivated the account 6 months ago, she had stared at the number on the screen. She was and had been for years independently massively wealthy, far wealthier than Julian ever knew. She had cashed out a fraction of it to fund Vance Analytics. She'd rehired her old team. Ravi, her data mining genius who could pull a password out of thin air. Anya, her forensic accountant who could follow a single dollar through a hurricane of shell companies. They had been working in a secure rented office in Geneva, and they were all fiercely loyal to the woman they'd thought had just been on a sabbatical. Her first and only client was Marcus Rivington. Marcus wasn't just an old boss. He was the man in the photograph. He had been her mentor, a surrogate father, and the most dangerous legitimate businessman in the world. He had been furious when she'd retired at 22 to marry that flashy second-rate bond trader with the good hair. Alara, sitting in her white box of a condo, had made the call. "Marcus, it's Alara Vance." "Alara," he'd answered, his voice full of warmth and sadness. "It's been 8 years. I thought you were cataloging art." "I was," she'd said, her voice flat. "Now I'm cataloging a high-level securities fraud. Your target Apex and your potential new partner, Julian Thorne." The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a chilling precision. "Go on." She laid it out. The shell companies, the backdated options, the wash trading to inflate volume, the timeline for the final pump and dump. She spoke for 10 minutes, a solid, uninterrupted stream of data. When she was finished, there was a long silence. "How do you know this?" Marcus asked. "He's sloppy," Alara said. And he thought I was stupid. He kept the data on an encrypted drive. He used his first stock ticker as the password. Another silence, this one vibrating with what sounded like suppressed laughter. And what do you want, Ilara? Revenge. Revenge is emotional, Marcus. This is a balance sheet, Ilara said coolly. Julian isn't just a bad husband, he's a bad risk. His entire company is a house of cards. His apex deal is the kerosene, and he's about to light the match. You'll lose your investment, and hundreds of your partners will lose their pensions. So you're calling to warn me? No, I'm calling to make a pitch. You hold your investment, you stall, you demand a third-party audit. And that third party, she said, will be me, Vance Analytics. We won't just expose the fraud. We'll find the real value. Because he's so focused on the con, he's missed the actual assets. And when the company collapses and the feds move in, we will be waiting. We won't just short him, Marcus. We'll buy him. For pennies on the dollar. This time Marcus Rivington laughed. It was a deep, powerful sound like an engine turning over. He took your best years, Ilara. He took my time, she corrected. Now I'm billing him for it. At my old rate. Plus interest. The jet will be at Teterboro at midnight, Marcus said. Welcome back, Ms. Vance. The world has been far too quiet. Julian Thorne was a man in freefall. The Vance Analytics report wasn't just a report, it was a detonation. It hadn't just gone to the board. Ilara had, with surgical mathematical precision, sent copies to the SEC, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, and the killing blow, the Financial Times. The story broke on a Tuesday. Thorne in their side, Julian Thorne's Apex deal revealed as House of Cards. The article quoted the report extensively, praising the anonymous Vance Analytics as a new razor-sharp firm whose analysts possessed a near-prophetic understanding of market fraud. It called the report a masterpiece of financial data sleuthing. The fallout was immediate. His assets were frozen by noon. His partners, the ones he'd laughed with about Ilara, filed a $500 million lawsuit by 3 p.m., naming him personally. The SEC opened a formal public investigation. His name, once a byword for aggressive success, was now toxic. He was in the penthouse surrounded by Chloe's chrome horse lamps and white fur rugs, watching his life dissolve on a loop on CNBC. They're calling you a Ponzi scheme, Chloe whispered, her face pale beneath her tan. She was holding her phone, her thumb frozen over her Instagram feed. Julian, my followers are asking questions. Shut up, Julian roared, hurling his empty whiskey glass at the screen. She did this, that snake, that quiet, boring snake. He couldn't reconcile the two images, the quiet, submissive wife who organized his sock drawer and the ruthless corporate assassin who had just vivisected him in the Financial Times. How had he missed it? He'd lived with her for 8 years. How had he never seen her? The answer, agonizing and clear, was that he had never looked. He had only ever seen his own reflection in her eyes. Julian, Chloe said, her voice shaking. She was no longer pale. She was angry. I just tried to buy a ticket to Aspen. To go to my mother's. My Amex was declined. The black card, the one you gave me. The assets are frozen. Chloe, it's temporary, he yelled, grabbing his hair. It's a misunderstanding. I'll fix it. Fix it. Fix it, she shrieked. You lied to me. You said you were a king. You're a criminal. My mother called me. She said I'm on page 6 as the con man's hooker. She grabbed her pre-packed Louis Vuitton duffel. She'd always been ready for a quick trip and stormed to the door. So that's it. Julian laughed, a broken, ugly sound. The money's frozen, so you're gone. I can't be part of this, she sobbed, jabbing the elevator button. You said she was nothing. You said she was simple. You're the simple one, Julian. You got taken down by your boring old wife. The elevator doors opened. She was gone. Julian was alone. His phone rang. He looked at it. Robert Jacobson. He ignored it. It rang again. Frank Haverford, one of his oldest partners. He ignored it. The intercom buzzed. He ignored that too. He sat for a long time. The silence of the penthouse was deafening. He was broke. He was ruined. He realized with a jolt of pure terror, going to prison. Unless... A new desperate, insane idea formed. A last pathetic gambit. He had to talk to her. He had to see her. If he could just see her, he could... What apologize? Beg, remind her of the good times. He didn't know. He just knew he couldn't face the police. He couldn't face his partners. He had to face her. He knew where she would be. The newspapers had said Rivington was in town. Rivington was in Monaco for the Grand Prix. She would be there. He scrambled. His cards were dead. He went to his safe, the one behind the abstract painting. He had emergency cash. Running money, he'd called it. $100,000. Chloe had never known about it. He took it all. He grabbed his passport. He didn't pack a bag. He went out the service entrance, a fugitive in his own building. He found a pawn shop in the Diamond District. He sold his watch, a Patek Philippe 5711, the Nautilus. The irony was bitter. The man laughed at him. "This is hot, isn't it?" "It's real," Julian snarled. "Sure, buddy." The man gave him $10,000 for a $150,000 watch. Julian took the cash. He used it to buy a one-way last-minute first-class ticket. Even in ruin, he couldn't fly coach. He was going to Monaco, not for a meeting, for a confrontation. Port Hercules was a different world. It was a forest of white masts and gleaming superstructures, a glittering display of obscene gravitational wealth. The air was thick with the smell of diesel salt and money. In the distance, the high-pitched, hornet-like scream of a Formula One car practicing on the circuit echoed off the hills. Julian Thorne looked like a ghost at the feast. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. His $10,000 Savile Row suit was creased and smelled of airplane whiskey. His face was a gray stubbled mask. He'd had to take a taxi from the airport in Nice, and the driver had sneered at his crumpled $100 bills. He was a refugee in the land of kings. He stood on the quay, jostled by tourists and arrogant polo-shirted yacht crews. He had no plan. He just knew with the homing instinct of a dying animal that she was here. And then he saw it. It wasn't just a yacht. It was a statement. It was a weapon. The Olympus. Moored in the Billionaire's row of the port, it sat like a pale gray shark eclipsing every other vessel. At 150 meters, it was less a boat and more a floating corporate headquarters. It had tinted bulletproof glass, a helicopter on the aft deck, and men in subtle dark blue uniforms patrolling the perimeter with earpieces. It belonged, of course, to Marcus Rivington. Julian just stared. This was the world he had been trying to enter. Now he was outside it, looking in like a street urchin at a banquet. He watched for an hour. He saw sheikhs and tech billionaires ferried to the stern on sleek black tender boats, only to be politely but firmly turned away by Rivington's security. Then a different tender approached. It was military-grade, low-profile, and wickedly fast. It docked with practiced efficiency. Several figures in dark professional suits disembarked, followed by a woman. Julian squinted against the bright Mediterranean sun. It was her. But it was not the Alara he knew. The cream-colored wife dresses were gone. She wore a razor-sharp white linen pantsuit by Loro Piana. Her hair, which she used to wear long and soft at his request, was cut into a chic, severe bob that grazed her jawline. She wore dark, angular sunglasses that hid her eyes. She had a Cartier watch on her wrist, a new one, a complex model he'd never seen. She was flanked by her team, the data nerd Ravi and the sharp-eyed Anya. She was walking up the gangway, and she was laughing. It was a low, confident sound. She was pointing at something on a tablet, and the men around her were listening, nodding, absorbing her words. At the top of the gangway, a man was waiting. He was older, with a shock of silver hair and a deeply tanned face radiating a power that made Julian's own Master of the Universe persona look like a cheap costume. Marcus Rivington. Rivington wasn't greeting her like a date. He wasn't kissing her cheek or taking her arm. He was shaking her hand, firmly, like a partner, like an equal. Julian felt a surge of adrenaline of pure, unadulterated rage that burned away his fear. It was a sickness in his stomach. He had been replaced. She had simply traded up. Ilara. The name was ripped from his throat, a raw, desperate animal sound that carried across the water. The laughing stopped. On the deck of the Olympus, Ilara froze. The men around her tensed. Rivington's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the crowd with terrifying speed, instantly finding the disheveled, frantic man on the quay. One of the security guards on the deck unbuttoned his jacket. "Ilara!" Julian screamed again, taking a step towards the water. "Ilara, you can't. It was our life. You can't just do this." Ilara turned, slowly. She took off her sunglasses. Julian waited for the shock, the anger, the pity, the something. There was nothing. Her eyes were exactly as they had been in the lawyer's office. Blank, impersonal, cool. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen in a petri dish, a problem that has already been solved. She stared at him for a full 10 seconds. The entire port seemed to go silent. Julian could feel the eyes of tourists, of security guards, of Rivington himself, all on him. He was the spectacle. Ilara's gaze was so cold, so final, it shattered the last of his rage, leaving only a hollow, echoing terror. Then, with an almost imperceptible tilt of her head, not a nod but a simple, devastating acknowledgement of his existence, she turned her back on him. She put her sunglasses back on. She said something to Marcus Rivington, who smiled, as Julian Thorne watched, broken and bankrupt, on the docks. Ilara Vance, his quiet, simple ex-wife, walked into the heart of the Olympus, disappearing into a world of power he could never, ever touch. He fell to his knees. His scream of pure, pathetic rage was lost in the sudden, deafening roar of a Formula One car screaming past on the nearby track. The heavy, soundproofed glass door of the Olympus's main salon slid shut with a pneumatic hiss, instantly severing them from the world outside. The distant, desperate cry of Julian Thorne and the high-pitched whine of the Formula One cars were all erased, replaced by the deep, vibrationless hum of the ship's stabilizers and the whisper of chilled, recycled air. The room was not a salon. It was a command center. Where Julian's penthouse was a monument to his ego, all gold, black marble, and harsh reflective surfaces, this room was a statement of pure, unadulterated power. The walls were a soft, matte gray teak inlaid with high-definition screens that were currently displaying global market data, weather patterns, and secure video feeds. The furniture was minimalist, white, and steel, functional, and yet impossibly expensive. It was a space designed for decisions that could topple governments. Marcus Rivington was already standing by a low-profile bar, pouring a single glass of what looked like sparkling water. He hadn't broken a sweat. He hadn't even flinched. He simply looked at Ilara, his eyes the color of a summer sky, crinkling with amusement. "Well," he said, his deep voice resonating in the quiet, "that was a dramatic little performance. He has a flair for the theatrical, I'll give him that." Ilara unbuttoned the single button on her Loro Piana jacket and placed her tablet on a long steel console. She didn't look flustered. She looked like a general who had just observed a minor, predictable skirmish. "He always was a terrible actor," Ilara said, her voice cool and even. She walked over and accepted the glass from Marcus. "All volume, no substance. He thinks screaming is a form of power. It's just noise." He looked distraught, Marcus observed, watching her closely. Ilara took a small, composed sip. "He's not distraught, Marcus. He's just realized he lost. He confuses the consequences of his own actions with a personal tragedy. It's his defining characteristic." A small, genuine smile touched Marcus's lips. 8 years. You were with him for 8 years. And he never, not for 1 second, saw you, did he? He saw what he wanted to see. Alara said, turning to look at the main screen where the London, New York, and Tokyo markets were ticking away. He saw a beautiful, quiet, complementary object. He saw his own reflection. It was his greatest comfort and his most catastrophic vulnerability. Well, his comfort is about to be permanently removed. Marcus picked up a small black remote. Anya and Ravi are patched in from Geneva. It's time for the debrief. He clicked a button. Two of the large screens flickered and the faces of her team appeared. Ravi looking rumpled in a hoodie and Anya sharp and alert in a crisp black blazer. Alara, Mr. Rivington, Anya said, her voice clear. The report was delivered, as you know. It was more than delivered, Anya, Marcus said, leaning against the console. It was a detonation. I've just had calls from the U.S. Attorney General, the head of the SEC, and a very, very panicked-sounding senator. They're calling your report the Rosetta Stone for his entire organization. Julian built his company like a gambler. Ravi chimed in, his voice slightly tinny. He left data trails everywhere. He was sloppy arrogant. He thought no one was smart enough to connect the dots. He never planned on someone like Alara. Alara walked to the main screen, which showed a complex web-like diagram of Julian's shell corporations. This, she said, pointing to a cluster of companies, is what he thought was the prize. The Apex deal. A multi-billion-dollar pump and dump. The con. It was all a lie. She tapped a key on the console, and the diagram changed, highlighting a single obscure holding company at the bottom. But this is what he actually had. This is the value. What is it? Marcus asked, stepping closer. It's a clean energy tech firm he acquired 3 years ago. Alara explained, her voice quickening with the passion she only showed for data. He bought it for the real estate, a factory in Nevada. He stripped the assets and buried the company, but he's so intellectually lazy he never did a full audit of its IP. He never read the file. She typed another command. A new file appeared. Dormant patents for next-generation solid-state battery cell recharging technology. They're not just theoretical, Marcus. They're fully tested. The R&D is done. This, she tapped the screen, is a trillion-dollar technology, and it's been sitting in a file cabinet in a company he listed as defunct. My God, Marcus breathed. He was so focused on the con. He was willing to burn the truth to fuel it, Alara finished. He was going to let this all go to receivership to be sold for scrap, just so he could make a quick, fraudulent $2 billion. He's not just a criminal, Marcus. He's a bad businessman. Marcus Rivington was silent for a long moment, simply staring at the screen and then at Alara. The amusement was gone, replaced by a profound, calculating respect. He's a gambler, Marcus said finally. And you, Alara, you are the house. He walked to a heavy, polished teak desk at the far end of the salon. He didn't pull out a file. He produced a thick, leather-bound prospectus. The Rivington Group will not be acquiring the Apex portfolio, he said, his voice formal. Alara raised an eyebrow. Oh, we're not in the business of cleaning up other people's toxic messes, Marcus said. He walked back and placed the heavy document on the console in front of her. We're in the business of funding visionaries. She looked down. On the cover, in clean silver embossed letters, were 2 words. Vance Capital. Alara stared at it, her composure momentarily cracking. Her breath caught. It was the name she'd scribbled in a notebook in her MIT dorm room a lifetime ago. This isn't a job offer, Alara, Marcus said, his voice soft. It's an investment. The Rivington Group will provide $5 billion in seed capital. You will be the CEO. You will lead the acquisition. You will run the company. You will be the majority stakeholder. We will simply be your silent partners. He leaned in, his expression intense. I'm not doing you a favor. You've just walked in here and handed me the single greatest investment opportunity of the decade. I'm betting on the analyst, not the assets. And I intend to win. Alara looked from the prospectus to Marcus's face, 1,000 emotions warring behind her eyes. Before she could speak, her satellite phone buzzed. Not her personal phone, but the encrypted one. The one for her team. She held up a single finger to Marcus. He nodded. She answered. "Go," she said. "It's done." Anya's voice came through crisp and final. The SEC unsealed the indictment 10 minutes ago. The FT and Wall Street Journal articles are live. The board has been served. And Julian Thorne. "What about him?" Ilara asked, her voice a flat line. "He's being detained as we speak." "On what grounds?" "It's almost poetic," Anya said, a rare hint of humor in her voice. "He was on an exclusion list. His passport was electronically flagged by the U.S. government 2 hours ago, pending the unsealing of the indictment. He entered France on a visa that was revoked mid-flight. He's not just a criminal, Ilara. As of right now, he's an illegal alien." A slow, cold smile, the first one of the day, touched Ilara's lips. Julian, the man who saw himself as a global king, was now a stateless person, a non-entity. "And the port security?" Ilara asked. "They're holding him for Interpol. He's not going anywhere but a French holding cell until extradition." "Thank you, Anya." Ilara ended the call and looked at Marcus. "He's been neutralized. Officially." She turned back to her team on the video feed. "Anya, Ravi, execute." "Execute what?" Marcus asked, pouring himself a drink. "My offer," Ilara said, her focus now absolute. "We're not waiting for receivership. That's messy. It will take years. The patents will get tangled in litigation. We're going to the board now, the one that's left, and offering to make their investors whole. A full buyout of the legitimate assets effective immediately." "You're not even going to lowball them?" Marcus asked, impressed. "I'm not a scavenger, Marcus. I'm a surgeon," Ilara said. "We'll cut the cancer Julian's fraud away, and we will save the patient, the technology. We're not buying his worthless, fraudulent company. We're acquiring his one priceless asset, the one he was too stupid to see." Marcus stared at her, then threw his head back and laughed, a deep, powerful sound that filled the room. "My God, Ilara. You're not just taking his company, you're taking his legacy and rewriting it from the ground up." He walked to the bar and poured a second glass, this one from a crystal decanter containing a dark amber liquid. He handed it to her. "He thought you were a painting," Marcus said, his voice full of admiration. "Something beautiful and silent to hang on a wall. He never ever realized you were the architect." He raised his glass. "To Vance Capital." Ilara looked at the name on the prospectus, then at her mentor. She raised her glass, the clink of crystal sealing the deal. "To the balance sheet." She corrected, a small private smile playing on her lips. "It's finally balanced." She took a sip. It was an 18-year-old Macallan. It tasted like victory. Cold, clean, and absolute. Outside, the sun was setting on Monaco, but in the command center of the Olympus, Ilara Vance's world was just beginning. Ilara Vance's story teaches us a powerful lesson: never mistake silence for weakness. Julian saw his wife as a beautiful decoration, and his arrogance was his downfall. He couldn't see the brilliant mind working behind those quiet eyes, a mind that wasn't plotting revenge but was calculating his end. She didn't fight him for his scraps because she was already planning to buy his entire company. She didn't argue over the divorce settlement because she was positioning herself to become the billionaire, not just marry one. What did you think of Ilara's ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love stories where the underestimated protagonist wins in the most epic way possible, make sure to like this video, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more drama and incredible twists. Don't miss what's coming next.